Hi, welcome to another exciting Unity tutorial with me, Romy Fauzi. In this video, we are going to create a customizable or reusable dialog system. And this is the dialog system here. Have you ever wondered how to create a custom dialog system that is reusable for different objects in Playmaker? Because I've been looking a way to do this in Playmaker actually. And it was quite easy on scripting via C#, but for a lot of Playmaker projects that I've seen in the past, usually the dialog systems is done for a specific game object. Oftentimes in Playmaker, the dialog system is hardwired to trigger behaviors for a certain group of game objects. And this also involves a lot of if statement and nested if, which in turn will make debugging process very hard. And here in this video, we are going to create reusable dialog system. And basically the dialog system will only consist of these states here. It's very simple. And for the yes event, this will trigger the color yes event. And for the no event, this will trigger the color no event. And in this video also, we are going to use template to create custom actions or a set of actions that can be grouped into a template, and we can run those templates like an action here. As you can see on this on-click state here, I'm using a run FSM actions, and we are actually running a template here. And with this template, we can expose the variable, and here we can customize the variable value here. And this is for defining the message. So this is what are we going to create. I'm going to run this, and now let's see this in action. So here, if I click the create, you see that we have this message, and it's a different string compared to this barrel one. And for the response here, let's just increase the window size here. If we pick one of the button here to the left, it will move the object to the left. And if I click again and then pick the one that to the right, it will move the object to the right. And with this barrel here, if I click on this barrel, it will show a different message and also a different text button. So here it asks, do you want to burn the barrel? And if I press yes, it will enable a particle. And if I click it again, and if we want to stop, if we pick the other button, which is stop flame, this will stop the particle. So this dialog system is very versatile, it's very dynamic and reusable. Okay, let's jump to the tutorial. But before we jump into the tutorials, if you want to learn how to create a game from scratch to a complete game, check out my online Unity courses. I've published a couple of courses covering best practices in game development with topics ranging from programming to visual tuning, desktop to a mobile platform, object-oriented programming, and many other useful tips. With the price of a takeaway, you'll get lifetime access to the course. Link in the description below. Here I have a scene prepared, and there is a couple of objects here. We have a small crate and also a small barrel. And for the small barrel, I've already prepared a particle to trigger when we are triggering the dialog system. And here we can create a different behavior. For example, we can just move the object to the right or to the left to trigger the yes and no event. So the next step that we need to create is we need to create the dialog system first. And in order to do that, let's just create a new canvas. And I'm going to set this canvas to a scale with screen size on the canvas scaler. And I'm going to set this to a full HD resolution. And I'm going to set the match to 0.5. And here I'm going to set the view to 2D view so we can see the canvas better. And here, the next thing that I want to do, I want to create an empty game object. And I'm going to stretch this empty game object to be the full size of the canvas. So here under the anchor presets, I'm going to hold Alt and then press the bottom right presets here. And this will fill the game object to the size of the canvas automatically. And let's just call this a dialog system. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to create the panel. Here, to create the panel, I'm going to create a new image. And for the image size, we can set specific value. For example, I'm going to set this to 700 by 400. And this can be any size you want, depending on your UI design. And this is going to be the panel. And I'm going to also add a empty game object here. And I'm going to stretch the empty game object to the bottom part of the panel here. So I can just click on the anchor preset and then hold Alt and choose this one here. And I'm going to set the height to around 70 and set the position Y to 0, so it will be halfway outside of the panel and halfway inside of the panel. and this will be the button group. And for the button group, we can add a horizontal layout group, and this will arrange the child object nicely in a horizontal manner. For example, let's just add a button here, and this button, if we duplicate this, you'll see that we will have multiple buttons spaced nicely. And here under the button group, we can change the button alignment to middle centers. This will center all of the button here, and we can adjust the size of the button. For example, we can increase the size to, let's say, 300, and for the height, let's just also set this to 70. So we have two nice big buttons here. And for the text, we can increase the size. I'm going to set using the best fit value here, and this should be good. These settings here, the minimum size and the maximum size, and it will change the size depending on the content of the text. For now, I'm going to set the first one to yes, and the second one to no. But later, we can change this text depending on the object color or the object that are using this dialog system. Now let's make things even nicer. Here, I'm going to add a text, and let's just fit the text to this panel size here. But let's add a margin on each side. I'm going to set the margin to 50 on the left, right, and top. And for the bottom, I'm going to set this even higher to around 100. And let's set the alignment of the text here to center and middle. And we can also set best fit for this text here. And we can even increase this even larger, around 60 for the max size. So we have even a bigger text for the message. And now this is how our dialog system currently looking. And let's change the panel here. I've already imported a UI assets, and I will put all of the assets that I use in this tutorial in the description. And here, this is the UI asset here. And you see it has a lot of assets. So I'm going to search for the panel here and use one of this panel as the panel. We can just drag this panel as the art here. And let's just use the sliced, and it doesn't have a border. So in order to use this, we can just go to the sprite editor and then add a border. Yeah, so this should work. I'm going to apply this border here, and now if we go back here with the slice, as you can see, we can change the size or the ratio pixels per multiplier, so we can create interesting panel. I'm going to set this to 1.5. And for the button here, we can just pick one of the buttons that are available here. So for the yes button, let's pick the green one. And for the no button, I'm going to pick the red one. And we can also use slice for this example, but since this have a pattern, as you can see, it won't work. So let's just set this back to simple, and let's just preserve the aspect. So it will set nicely as the original image ratio. And for the text here, let's just add a margin so it fits inside the button. Like so, this should be okay. And this one here, let's just also set the margin. And for the text, we can pick other font. I'm going to use the Verdana font here. And let's just set this to bold. And for the color, we can change this to a dark green. And for the no text, let's just also set this to Verdana using bold as the style. And I'm going to set this to a dark red here. Pick this red here and set this to a slightly darker value. And for the main text, let's just also set this to Verdana. And for the color, we can set this to a yellowish dark yellow here. Okay, so now we have this dialog system set up. Let's create the FSMs to trigger this dialog here. So here, I'm going to add a new FSM on the dialog system object, the empty game object that we created first before creating the panel. And don't put the FSM on the panel, put on the empty game object, this one here. So let's just create a new FSM here. And I'm going to set the first state to be empty, and I'm going to add a new state, I'm going to delay this one frame here, delay next frame for the state here, and I'm going to add a next frame event. So I'm going to make sure that we are going to show the dialog one frame after we are triggering the event. So in order to make sure that this dialog has received all of the information needed, such as the message text, the text button, and also the object that are calling this dialog game object. Once it receives all of those information, then we want to show the dialog. So here I'm going to add a finish event, and we can just call the finish event, and upon finish, then we want to show the dialog here. And let's create a global event called show dialog, and let's make this a global event by checking this box here and add a global transition using that global event that we have just created. We need to create a couple of variables to initialize all of this text here. So we need to create a couple of string value. First one, let's just create the message and the yes text and also the no text. And the last one that we need to create is a game object variable, and let's just call this color. And basically here we want to use the UI text set text, UI text set text here action, and we need to create a couple of set text here. I'm going to specify game object, and the first one would be the message here. Let's just drag this text game object, the one that is the child of the panel outside the button group. And the second one will be the yes text, and we need also the third action, so I'm going to duplicate this and set the no text here. And for the main text, I'm going to set this value to the message variable. Right now it's empty, but on gameplay we are going to set this value from other objects. And minimize this action here. And for the text here, let's just use the yes string. And for this one here, we can just use the no string. And upon setting up this value here, we want to activate the panel. So use the activate game object here. And basically we want to show, so we can just enable the activate on and disable the recursive. And for the game object, we want to specify game object, which is the panel here. Okay, and upon start here, we can hide the panel. So let's just use the activate game object also, and disable the recursive, and also disable the activate option, and use the specify game object, and let's just drag this panel here. Okay, and basically we want to create two button event to trigger this button here. So let's just create a new event called yes event and make this global. And for the other event, which is the no event, we want to also make this a global event. And here inside the state, we want to use the button event, on click event here. So let's just use the UI button on click event. And here we need to specify the button, and we want to drag the first button. The first button is the yes button, so we want to trigger the yes event. And we haven't set up those events yet here in the FSM, but we are going to do this in a moment. And let's just duplicate this action and drag the second button. And this one, we want to send this to no event. And now let's create a new state. Let's just call this click yes. And for the other one, we can just duplicate from this one here later. So I'm going to add a global transition yes event. And now this should remove the error on this first button on click event. And now let's just send an event to a game object that we have set up here in the variable, which is the color. So we can just pick the game object FSM for the event target. And for the game object, we want to specify game object here. And let's just call the color here. And we need to define an FSM actually, but this is only needed if the game object has more than one FSM. And for the sake of reusability, let's just specify the FSM name. So here we need to create a new string variable and let's just call this FSM name, and use that variable for this FSM name here. And for the event here, we want to send the yes event to that game object, the color one. And here, after clicking the yes button, we want to deactivate the panel. So let's just disable the activate and recursive, and also specify game object, and then drag the panel game object here. Now we have set up this state. We can just duplicate the state here, and this will be the click no. And here we want to trigger the no event, and the rest should be the same. But the event, the global transition here, we need to change this to no event. And now we have removed the error from this to button on click event. Another thing that we can do to make things easier, we can create a global variable to hold this dialog system. So I'm going to create a new game object, and I'm going to call this dialog system. And then here, I'm going to set to get the owner of this game object. Here, I'm going to put this above the activate game object. And I'm going to store this game object to a global variable, which is the dialog system. And now, if we want to call this game object, or we want to access this game object, we can just access the global variable that we have created. And now let's create a template to trigger this action. And basically, template will make things very easy to group a couple of actions as one template or as one action, and we can create custom actions with it actually. So first, in order to create a template, I'm going to create an empty game object, and let's just reset its value, and we can name this anything. I'm going to name this template color, but later we are going to delete this game object, so it doesn't really matter actually. And here, let's just create a new FSM, and let's just name this init dialog. And basically, we need to create all of the variable that we have created on the dialog system. So let's just create a couple of string variable, which is the message, and then the yes text, and then no text, and the FSM name, and also the game object variable called color. And all of this variable need to be enabled as an input because we are going to input this value from other FSM. So let's just enable the input here, and you will see why we need to add this as an input. Okay, now we have set up all of the variable here. We can just send those value to this game object here. So we can just set FSM string value, and instead of using the owner, we can just specify game object and use the dialog system game object that we are initializing on the dialog system start. And for the FSM name, it doesn't really matter because basically this dialog system only has one FSM, so it will know that we want to assign the value of this variable for this FSM here. So back to the template color here, under the state here, we can just pick the let's just set up the message first and pick message variable, and then here for the other string would be the FSM name, and we can just pass the FSM name. I'm going to minimize this, and let's duplicate this 2 times, and this for the yes text. So this would be the yes, and we should have the same variable name, and this one, it should be for the no string, and let's just set this to no variable. And the last one that we want to use is the set FSM game object. And for the game object here, we need to set the target game object, which is the dialog system here. And for the variable name, it's going to be color, as we have defined before, and this should be also color. Now that we have set up all of the variable that we need to show the dialog system, we need to trigger the event. So let's just run the send event here. And basically, we want to send the event to the game object FSM, and we want to specify game object, and we want to access the dialog system here. And for the send event, we want to trigger the show dialog event here. the dialog that we have created to show the dialog here, this one here. So we need to trigger this one, and this will initialize all of the variable that we have sent to each of the text component and the game object that we have set up here in the variable. Okay, so now we have set up the template color here. I'm going to save this as a template, and let's just put it here, and let's just call this dialog color. And we don't want to use the save template on this game object here, because basically we are going to delete this game object. Okay, now we have set up the template. Next thing that we want to do is we want to create an action for each of these different crate and barrel here. So for the small crate, we can just add an FSM here. And I'm going to unpack this game object so we don't have this message. And this one also, we can just unpack this. And here, basically, we want to add a mouse pick event. And this can be anything. This can be trigger event. We can trigger this dialog system in any way how we want it. It depends on the design that we want. But just for showcasing this, I'm going to use the mouse pick event. And basically, I'm going to create event called onClick. And here, I'm going to add that onClick event here, transition. And for the mouse down, I'm going to add an onClick event here. And it requires collider, as you can see here. So let's just double click this. Add a box collider to the game object. Let's check. Okay, we already we add this collider. I'm going to adjust the size of the collider so it fits with the barrel that we have created. And for the barrel, this one here, we can just add another box collider. So let's just adjust the size here, 0.5, and I'm going to set the height to 0.7, and this should be 0.35. And for the X, I'm going to set this to around 0.7 perhaps. Yeah. Okay, yeah, this should do. And let's just set both of the trigger to enable so it won't collide with the ground object here. And the next thing that we want to do here for the small crate here, now we don't have that error anymore because we already create the collider. We want to send this to a new event, and we can just call this onClick and add a finish button. And let's just send this back to the first state on finish button. And here on click, we can add a run FSM template, run FSM. And here, this is a very powerful thing that Playmaker has already provided for us. And I can pick the template from this one here. And as you can see, or we can just browse from the assets here. But instead, I'm going to use this menu here. It is much easier. And this is the dialog color that we have created before. And once we click this here, you'll see it will show all of the inputs variable that we have created. And upon finish, we want to go back to finish here. So this will act as a custom action, and the action will be executed from this template here. So first, I need to use the get owner action before running this FSM here, and store this as a new variable called color. And we want to pass that variable color. And for the FSM name here, we can use this name here, just type FSM. And if you have a different FSM name, you need to use that one to make sure that the dialog system will target that FSM, will target the FSM with the same name. And for the message, we can just type a string directly here. Do you want to move the crate? And for no, here we can have two different options, and it doesn't always have to be no. We can type this, for example, to the left. Sorry, for no, let's just set this to the right. And for the yes, let's set this to the left. And this will change the text of the dialog system here. And if we add a new state, basically whenever we want to use the dialog system, we need to create two states that have the global transition of the yes event, and the other one would be the global transition for the no event. And basically, whenever we are showing the dialog system, if we press the yes or no, this event will be triggered depending on the button that we've pressed. So for a yes event, we can have different actions. For example, we can just use a twin move here. Where is it? The twin position. And I'm going to set from current position to the local offset. And I'm going to set for the yes is going to move to the left. So I'm going to set this to -1. And let's just copy this action here and paste it here. And then for the no event, we want to move this to the right. So let's just set this to a positive value, and we can add a finish transition. And basically we need to add this finish and go back to the first state. So we can click the object multiple times, and we can trigger the dialog system multiple times. Otherwise it will stuck on the state here. And if we don't go back to the first state here, we cannot trigger this dialog system again for this game object. Well, depending on the behavior that you want, that might be the one that you want. But in this case, I'm going to set this finish event. Okay, so now we have set up both this finish event, and we can just add a finish event here to send that event that we have defined. So it will wait until the movement are stopped, then it will go back to the first state. Okay, and for the second action, basically we can duplicate this FSM here and paste this to the second game object, the barrel. And here we already have this FSM set up. We can just remove this. Instead of using the twin position, we want to play the particle. And for the yes event, we want to trigger this fire particle. So we can just drag this particle here, and I'm going to access the particle system here. And for the script control, I want to use the call method. And here we can call the play method. And I'm going to duplicate this action here. And upon no, I'm going to stop the particle. Use this one here. So this will play the particle, and this one will stop the particle. And on click, we can just change the string message to, do you want to burn the barrel? And for the yes, we can just call this yes. And we can just call this a stop flame for the no button. And for the FSM name, it should be also FSM because I haven't changed this. And let's save the scene. So now we have set up the barrel FSM. This will work actually, but there will be one issue with this setup. Here under the first state, we are using the mouse pick event. And the problem with mouse pick event, it cannot detect if we are clicking on top of UI or not. So for example, if we click the barrel and it shows this dialog here, and we press the yes button, this event that we are pressing this button here can trigger the mouse pick event for this crate here. So we need to create a mechanics or a feature, a behavior where we will detect if the dialog window is currently open or not. And in order to do that, let's go to the canvas here and to the dialog system. And basically we need to create a global variable. So I'm going to go to the Playmaker here. Under the tools, I'm going to open the global variables window, and I'm going to create a Boolean variable. And let's just call this dialog active. And here, basically, whenever we are showing the dialog, we want to set the dialog active Boolean value to true. So let's just use this set bool value here. And we need to make sure that we put this on top of the onClick event. And here, let's access the globals and select the dialog active variable and enable the Boolean value here. And we can duplicate, or we can just copy this action by pressing Ctrl C. And whenever we are clicking the yes button or the no button, we want to set this back to false. So here I'm going to paste the set bool value actions and set this to false, and same with the no event here. Let's just paste it here and then uncheck this here. And we want to also set the boolean value to false on start here, so let's just disable this. So basically, if the panel is disabled, we want to set this as disabled, but if we are activating the panel here, then we want to set the dialog active to true, and the same goes on the yes event here. When it's disabled, we want to disable the boolean, and also with the no event here, the same. And now we have set up this boolean value. We can go to the small crate here, and we need to create one other state here. So let's just create a new state here, and we can call this for check dialog active. And basically here we want to use the boolean test, so let's just add a bool test, and we want to check the dialog active from the global variables here. And if it's true, we want to leave this empty, and if it's false, then we want to go to the next state. So here let's create an event called continue, and let's add a finish transition and also add the continue transition. So if it's false, then we want to go to the continue here. Basically, if the dialog is disabled upon clicking, then we want to go to the on-click here, and this will make sure that we won't be clicking on other object by accident when the dialog window is opened. And here we can use the next delay, next frame event. And if the dialog active boolean is true, we won't be triggering this, but we want to trigger the transition on the next frame. We need to delay the finish transition, because if we set it in the bool test action and then go back to the first state, this will trigger the on-click transition again, since we are still in the same frame, and this will create an infinite loop. So I'm going to add a finish state here and connect the finish state to this state here. And now upon clicking, we want to go to the second state. So basically, whenever we click on this game object, it will check if the dialog is active or not. If it's not active, then we want to enable the dialog here by using the run FSM. And if the dialog is currently active, then it means that we are currently having other object calling the dialog. And if the dialog active is true, then the bool test won't send any event, but we are going to send the event on the next frame. And this is to prevent the infinite loop, because if we send this on this bool test here, it will go back to the on-click and it will trigger the on-click again, because we are still in the same frame. So it will go back to the check state again and then go back to the first state and so forth. So this will prevent that. And now we have this set up. I'm going to duplicate this state here, copy state, and I'm going to also apply this to the barrel FSM. So I'm going to paste the state, and here we can just connect the on-click to the state here, and upon finish, go back to the first state, because we want to cancel the dialog clicking or the object clicking. And if the dialog active is false, then we want to continue to calling the dialog system here. Let's save the scene, and now let's give it a try. If I press play here, you'll see that if I click on this game object here, we can go to the left, and if I click it again, we can choose the other button, which is go to the right, and this will trigger the questions, which is the do you want to move the crate, and I'm going to move this back to the right here. And if we click on the barrel here, it will trigger different questions. Do you want to burn the barrel? And if we press yes, you see that it will trigger the particle effect. And basically we are using the same dialog system, which is this one, the same button, but each of the button will trigger different event on different game object, because we are sending all of those information using the FSM template here. And if we click on this barrel again, we can choose the stop the flame button, and this will stop the particle. So with this setup, this makes it very easy to trigger dialog system, and this dialog system can be reused by different objects, and we don't have to create a lot of dialog systems just to respond to one object that asking the questions to the user, and this will make the development much easier and much dynamic using Playmaker. I hope you like this tutorial, and if you like it, hit that like button and also don't forget to subscribe. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.